Welcome to the DeFi podcast, where we attempt to imagine the future of crypto because foresight is what makes great investors. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment. All statements made by hosts or guests are strictly beliefs or point of views and are not recommendations to buy, sell, or hold any security. Hosts or guests may hold certain securities discussed in this podcast.
Welcome to the DeFi podcast. Today we're speaking to Michelle Tian from Ava Labs. Michelle is a technical product manager at Ava Labs with a background in strategy, credit, and structured products. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Welcome. So let's jump into it. Michelle, could you provide us an intro as to what BTC.b consists of?
Yeah, absolutely. So BTC.b is native Bitcoin that has been bridged over from the Bitcoin blockchain over to the Avalanche blockchain. It's denoted as BTC.b because it is a wrapped version of Bitcoin, and it is represented on the Avalanche C chain as an ERC20 token.
Can you explain a bit about how the wallet works? So, for example, if you're using the core wallet, how does the local side of the Bitcoin wallet work?
Yeah, there's a really good technical paper published by Michael, who is a staff engineer on the Bridge team. I highly recommend that because it's written really in depth, but I'll try my best to kind of go through the high level there. So the Ethereum or EVM bridge and the Bitcoin bridge are really similar. It's really just the Avalanche bridge, very similar technology and architecture fundamentally. But to your point, the main difference is really that Bitcoin handles UTXOs. And so as a result, the wallet structure is quite more complicated and different. So as a high level, you have Bitcoin wallets are usually HD or hierarchical deterministic wallets. And the way that they take the transaction and then spit it out back to the user is quite different because instead of like one address, it splits out into many different transactions. And as a result, it can be really difficult for the user as there are many different addresses that the transaction amount is sent to. So what we have done with our core wallet is that we've found a way to share the same private key and such that, the transaction ultimately is sent into one wallet address for the user. So it's a very seamless and integrated and simple process for users. Ultimately, that's one of the core reasons why right now, Bitcoin bridging is really only available in the core wallet. So it's that technology that we've done and abstracted away a lot of the technical difficulties for users.
It actually seems pretty cool because as it stands, if you are using a Bitcoin token until this point, I don't think there is any token where you still control your own keys.
Yeah, so I don't work primarily on the wallet so I'm not as familiar with all of that. Most of it, that's actually done all by a completely separate team. But I do believe that the technology is very unique.
Cool.
Michelle, would you be able to discuss the Intel SGX chip technology and why it's relevant to the bridging architecture?
Sure. So Intel SGX is one of the core fundamentals of the Avalanche bridge. What is it, right? So it's really just an Intel hardware technology that allows for trusted execution environments. Again, what does that mean? So essentially what it is the secure enclave that functions off-chain. So no single party or entity, including all of the wardens and Ava Labs, has unfettered access to the enclave itself. So that means that no single party can essentially mint or burn tokens. Instead, we have a trust model of 6 of 8. So we need 6 of the 8 wardens or bridge nodes to essentially approve any transaction. And that's the only way that new tokens will be minted or existing tokens will be burned. I think that's the key part of it is that it's off chain and that we have such a high trust model. Also, no funds can be released until there's corresponding transfer of tokens. So we have certain collateral checks such that we can't mint more tokens than what's locked on the bridge itself. So the enclave, again, is off-chain, but it communicates with the wardens or bridge nodes, which is on-chain.
Can you tell us a bit more about the Warden System?
Yeah. So there's currently 8 wardens. We have Anchor, Powborn, Opscan, Protofire, Beware, Blockdaemon, Chainstack, and then Ava Labs ourselves. So there's 8. And again, none of us or no single party has access to the enclave itself. When 6 of 8 of the wardens sign or agree on a transaction, that is what triggers the enclave to then go and call smart contracts to mint or burn the wrap tokens. So that's essentially what the wardens do. They're doing a variety of different functions, but the most important part is to listen for transactions that come from the bridge on chain and then send that to the enclave, which is off chain. So essentially, you have 8 independent companies that are validating and verifying transactions. So they're different companies with different employees, and they're all working independently to verify that all the transactions are indeed valid and that there aren't any duplicative transactions happening.
And how does this architecture differ from like a typical bridge architecture?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So typical bridges are very reliant on smart contracts. So that has been proven to be a weakness in bridges, unfortunately. So I think year to date we've seen around 2.5 billion in terms of bridge exploits or hacks. The Avalanche bridge, on the other hand, has very limited use of smart contracts. So again, we have this SGX enclave technology as well as this warden structure. The key difference is that there aren't any smart contracts on the Ethereum side, but there are smart contracts on the Avalanche side. On the Avalanche side, these smart contracts are very, very basic. They're simply, telling what they're doing is they're really just minting or burning these wrapped tokens, and they're very low complexity. So because it's so low in complexity, compared to other bridges, they're much more complicated. The whole structure of the bridge is just smart contracts. They don't have the secure enclave structure. So they're much more prolifically reliant on these more exploitable smart contracts. So you can think of the Avalanche Bridge smart contracts as similar to the Open Zeppelin ERC20 contracts, which is a de facto standard, right? It's been battle tested since 2016, has, I think, over like 100 billion in assets relying on it. So because of the low complexity of the Avalanche Bridge smart contracts, I think that's a huge difference, and that makes our bridge a lot more secure. In addition to that, we also are regularly audited. So to date, we've had 4 audits done, and that's actually quite a lot since the bridge has only been around for about a year.
Are there other security features that are worth discussing in relation to this bridge?
Okay, so as I mentioned, we have regular audits that are done on the bridge. We've had 4 audits done, and the bridge has only been around for slightly over a year. So I think that's pretty proven that we take security very seriously. In addition to our regular audits by third parties, we have highly sensitive monitoring and collateral checks. We have 24/7 on-call engineering support and pager duty setup. We use YubiKeys, which enhances our security. We also have a very large and growing security team. So on the bridge team itself, we actually have an SGX PhD security engineer. We also have a bug bounty program for anyone who can really go and see if there's any issues with the bridge, like report it to us, please, and we'll pay you a bounty. And I would say those are the main things. But I would also say that if you think about the 6 of 8 trust model, it's actually pretty high compared to some of the others out there. For example, in the recent Ronin and Harmony exploits, only one operator had to have been compromised for the entire bridge to go down. So ours is 6 of 8, and it truly is of a 6 of 8 structure. So what I mean by that is that these are 8 separate companies or entities that are monitoring and working on the bridge. They are established companies. They are publicly announced who they are. They are completely different nodes set up in completely different regions with no RPC connection or communication with one another. So I think that is, proven that they are very separate. And then also, I would say that Trail of Bits actually came out with some research recently that shows that for Ethereum network, you really only need 2 to compromise the entire network. And then for Bitcoin, that goes up to 4. So I think 6 of 8 when compared to others is actually a pretty high number.
It's actually nice to see, especially during, let's say, the last year of some very interesting events that have happened. The Avalanche bridge seems to be like one of the best bridges so far, because a lot of other bridges have had numerous problems.
Yeah, I think it's actually really unfortunate, right? Like I recognize that bridges for users can be a very sensitive topic because there have been so many exploits year to date. But I think that's one of the reasons why the bridge is so attractive to me personally as a user myself. The bridge itself is very secure. Ava Labs takes security extremely, extremely top of mind and a priority. So that's one big thing. It's also faster and cheaper and just simpler to use. So again, security from that perspective, I mentioned a bunch of different things already with the audits and all of that. But also the SGX technology itself enhances the security. And then on top of that, for cheaper and all the other items, so the bridge charges a flat $3 for every onboard and then $20 for every offboard. So this doesn't matter how much you're transferring. Currently, it's set as a flat fee. The reason why it's so cheap is because there are minimum number of contract calls. And also, I would say that we're really only charging to cover the gas or transaction costs. The bridge is also very fast. We have low latency. This is really because we're relying on the Avalanche consensus algorithm. And the last thing I would just say is that it's pretty simple to use. At least for me, I think it is. If you go to bridge.avax.network and you go and bridge a token over, after you actually do that process, there is a screen that pops up and tells you, where your transaction is at, how many confirmations are there. There's a link to the Explorer, and it's not really just the home screen and you don't have your tokens deposited on the C chain and you're confused as to where they went. Did you have a loss of funds or were attacked? It very clearly shows you the step of the process.
As somebody who's used a lot of bridges, I think the experience, like the user experience when using the Avalanche bridge, is like top quality.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very, very good. It brings me a lot of confidence in using the chain in general and working on the Avalanche L1.
So could you talk about the difference of using BTC.b versus the Lightning Network?
Sure. So the Lightning Network, uses state channels, which is really just a technique for allowing fast and cheap off-chain payments. Maybe a simple analogy is, let's think about a couple, right? Like maybe Susie and John. They pay for transactions for one another very frequently. They take each other out to dinner and pay each other's groceries and so forth. So every time they do that, they don't want to necessarily pay each other in Bitcoin for half of the amount of what one person owes the other, because this can get really time consuming and costly from a transaction fee perspective. And it's just a hassle. So what the Lightning Network really does is abstract away all those difficult one-off transactions into a ledger, such that all of that is done in a layer 2. And then at the end of the day, let's say at the end of the year, Susie owes John $10 worth of Bitcoin. She can just pay him that at the end on the Bitcoin network and pay for transaction costs there, rather than all those individual back and forth transactions throughout the year that gets them the overall, difference from a ledger perspective. So I would say that's kind of the idea of the Lightning Network. I think the key advantage of using, BTC.b on the C chain versus Lightning Network is that at the end of the day, the Lightning Network just uses Bitcoin, right? So you're very limited with what you can do with Bitcoin because of the lack of smart contracts and the lack of DeFi activities. So BTC.b is in the Avalanche ecosystem, and this opens you up to an entirely new and vast ecosystem of DeFi activities where you can borrow, swap, lend, and so forth. So I think that's one of the key differences, is just the limitation of what you can do on the Lightning Network with Bitcoin.
Yeah, and at Moremoney, we were, I believe, the first lending protocol on Avalanche to list BTC.b, and it has worked pretty nicely for us. We've seen an increasing level of demand for it, and yeah, it's a great asset to have on chain. Michelle, can you tell us a bit about the differences between BTC.b and then RAN BTC, WBTC, and the essentially the Ethereum alternatives?
Sure. So Ren BTC, I'm a little less familiar with, so maybe I'll focus on WBTC. But WBTC versus BTC.b, off the top of my head, I can think of, I guess, three major differences. So these categories are: one is centralization, the other one is cost, and the last one is access. So if you think about centralization, right, WBTC is centralized. In order to obtain wrapped Bitcoin, what you need to do is submit a request to a merchant. I believe there's 17 right now, such as Diversify, and then this merchant goes to a custodian and then exchanges the BTC for wrapped Bitcoin, and the BTC itself is held in custody by that custodian. So it's a whole process that you have to go through in order to get WBTC. If you compare this to BTC.b, you can simply go to bridge.avax.network and mint your, Bitcoin, BTC.b, at any time at your own luxury, and you don't have to wait for a custodian to go and approve this process. So this becomes especially difficult in times of redemptions. So, for example, if you want to redeem your WBTC, your wrapped Bitcoin, for Bitcoin, you have to go to the merchant to go and then request the custodian to release the BTC and then exchange that. So in times of volatile markets, this typically becomes an issue because redemptions don't occur on demand, and thus depegging can occur. So I think that's one of the biggest advantages that BTC.b has over wrapped Bitcoin, is that you can simply just go to the website and mint or burn whenever you want. The second thing I would say is cost. So I mentioned this already, but in order to get BTC.b, you just pay a flat $3 fee. This is what it's currently set to. So it is very inexpensive, and it doesn't matter how much you're transacting, the transaction size amount. It's just a flat $3 fee right now. Whereas if you compare this to wrapped Bitcoin, there's a couple different fees there. There's like merchant fees, custodian fees, and so forth. And these can be high. I think CoinList charges 0.25%, which obviously will increase as you are increasing the transaction amount. So the cost there is a big factor as well. The last thing I would say is access. So in order to get wrapped Bitcoin, you need to get KYC'd or AML'd approval, right, in order to get that. Whereas for BTC.b, you simply just use the website. There's no KYCing involved.
Has Avalanche given any thought to doing something similar to like a rush program for BTC.b in order to kind of encourage the liquidity to flow into the network?
That's a good question. I would defer to my business counterparts for that. I don't have much details, as well as the fact that I don't know if I can share anything else, but I would say that the team is definitely working on just growing the ecosystem and coming up with different ways to attract users onto the chain. I would say that one thing that's really interesting is the transaction fees or the bridge tolls. Again, it's onboarding from BTC to BTC.b is just a flat $3 currently. That all it's really doing is covering for the transaction fees. So we're not really profiting at all. There's a reason why we chose to do that. We are really trying to get people to come over to the Avalanche network and to deposit BTC.b and engage in the ecosystem and do more activity. So we are much more in a growth phase and trying to attract users rather than just, we're not out to just get your money and earn money and monetize. Like, we're really trying to build the ecosystem and grow.
How's the feeling of Ava Labs towards the amount of Bitcoin that's coming into the system, and what's the what's the feeling like as seeing that you have another on road to Avalanche?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think right now the Lightning Network is around 100 million in TVL, and BTC.b is currently at 60 million. So we're relatively close considering that we've launched, earlier this year in June. Um, that said, there is still a lot more growth that we think can happen. Recently, BTC.b was launched on Aave and Banky and all the rest, and we're actively working on expanding that. So I think as these sorts of use cases and DeFi activities expand, you will see more and more people kind of come and start using BTC.b. Currently, WBTC.e, which is the wrapped Bitcoin representation on the Avalanche C chain actually is, I think, around like 110 million in TVL. So it is higher than BTC.b, which I think just shows you that it is still early. So I think there is definitely a lot of room for growth and expansion there. I will say that I think in terms of volume, we've had over $100 million worth of BTC.b minted since we started in June of 2022.
Yeah, so the current TVL of Avalanche is about $1.55 billion. And if you were able to transfer 1% of BTC to BTC.b, assuming that people actually used it, staked it, or deposited it on Avalanche, it would more than triple the TVL of Avalanche. So this is a pretty worthwhile endeavor, I would say.
Cool. Was there anything else that you
Yeah.
wanted to talk about that maybe we didn't ask about?
Honestly, I think that's pretty much it. I hope that was helpful.
So a lot of people do not understand BTC.b, and there's not that much content on it. So we're really happy to get more info out there. And I think we just covered like sort of the main points, but most people do not understand the answers to these questions, and they should, because this is a good asset.
Yeah, I think it's kind of fair to say that if you
Yeah.
are somebody who, there's a lot of people who want to own BTC, even if they're on, Ethereum or Avalanche or any other chain. When you're holding something like WBTC, you kind of have the idea of like, I'm holding Bitcoin, which is sort of true, but it's also sort of not. And I think in this case, BTC.b is much, much closer to actually saying, I'm holding Bitcoin.
Exactly. Right. For the reasons of like decentralization, like you're holding custody of
Yeah.
Bitcoin, right? I think the only other thing I will mention is that we are also actively working on currently cross subnet communication. And that would really enable a lot of different use cases because we're working on arbitrary data message passing. So from one subnet to another and from subnet to C chain. So I think the use cases there are really exciting, and you can set up potentially different types of bridging um, technology and different types of DeFi activity and DApp integrations within the subnets and C chain. So pretty soon you'll see a lot of even more exciting use cases, I think, for BTC.b as we continue to enable this subnet communication.
And what that means for someone running a subnet is that they can now accept this token without having to set up any specific architecture related to this token, correct?
Yeah, so what it means is that we will be essentially building in like a VM library so that it's very easy for subnets to just take this, like a bunch of lines of code, and add it to their subnet itself and set it up in that sense so that there's very little technical activity that like someone would have to do in order to set it up. It's just like maybe like 3 command lines or something like that, and that'll essentially enable any sort of not just tokens, right? It could be NFTs, it could be governance, it could be any sort of message that you're passing from one subnet to another. So this could enable token bridges, it could enable NFT bridges, and a bunch of different types of use cases.
I think it's probably a pretty big barrier to entry for people who want to build a subnet, but maybe don't want to get into all the intricacies of building a bridge, right? Because I think building a subnet and your own product to run on a subnet is probably just as big an endeavor as actually building a good bridge.
Right, exactly. So I think it's definitely, we're really, really excited about it and we're actively working on it. And hopefully it'll bring more dApps into the Avalanche ecosystem as well. Currently, subnets function as islands. So there's, not really a good way or easy way to communicate from one subnet to another. So hopefully once we have some of this glue or integration from one subnet to another, as well as the C chain, you'll see a lot more use cases and functionality open up.
Cool. So thanks for watching. If you're still around, give us a like, comment about it. Tell us if you like BTC.b or not. And Michelle, thanks for coming on.
Thanks a lot,
Thank
Michelle.
you so much.
Next time.
Bye.
Bye.